last session, I think, is a really exciting one. I think it kind of concludes very nicely this day we've been having together. We've had conversations about authentic storytelling, respectful storytelling, finding the right people with which to work. And I think this film that we're about to see, that actually started as a short film and recently premiered at TIFF as a feature film, demonstrates a lot of the things that we've been talking about. So I'm going to get off the stage now, and we will screen Firecrackers. And then after the screening, we will invite back members of the creative team. So that would be Caitlin Grabham, the producer, as well as editor Simone Smith and the costume designer Mara Ziegler. So they will be back on stage. That conversation will be moderated by my colleague Laura Good. Laura works at TIFF. She's the manager of Film Circuit, and Laura also oversees all shorts programming that takes place here at TIFF. So she is a great person to lead the conversation after the screening. So we'll see you then.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you enjoyed the film. I'd like to introduce back to the stage our guest from the Firecracker team, Caitlin Grabham, producer. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin. Simone Smith, editor. And also Mara Ziegler, costume designer. Thanks so much for being here. Please grab a seat, join me. My name is Laura Good, for those of you who haven't been introduced to me just yet. I'm one of the year-round programmers here at TIFF. I work very closely with Canadian film and also short films, so I'm thrilled to be speaking with you ladies about this film. Big fan of the short as well as the feature that you all just saw. I was wondering if you could each just introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your involvement with the project and your background.
So I'm Caitlin, the producer of the film. I actually produced the short with Jasmine, our writer-director. Jasmine and I work primarily with each other. We've been making shorts since film school, and this was our first feature that we put together.
I'm Simone. I was the editor of the film. This is my first time working with any of these guys, but I was a fan of the short, and I heard the feature was happening, so I called some people and got a meeting, and we all clicked. It was great.
My name is Mara, and I was the costume designer on the film. I was also a fan of the short. I saw it at TIFF all those years ago. And yeah, I knew Jasmine from the film community, but we'd never worked together. So this is our first time.
Cool. And could you just tell us a little bit about, Caitlin, you might be the best person to speak to the genesis of this project as a feature film, but also the genesis of each of your involvement and how you came to be working on it.
Yeah, so Firecrackers was actually, the short film was our thesis project we did in our 4th year at Ryerson. For that, we didn't have in mind at the time that we were going to be making it into a feature. We just kept it as a short. And a few years later, when we were applying for the telefilm micro-budget, it was called micro-budget program at the time. Now it's the Talent to Watch program. We just felt like this was a natural choice to make our first feature. People kept on talking about it. It seemed to really resonate with women, and we thought that the themes were still relevant. So we really focused on making this film.
Yeah. I basically just 2 days before they started shooting, or maybe it was after you. I think 2 days before they started shooting, I went in for a meeting, and then 2 days into production, I got an email saying, like, we'd love to have you do the film. Like, let's get you a hard drive. Like, it was pretty quick from that point on.
I feel like you guys reached out to me pretty early. Like, I met probably in the winter. We didn't end up shooting until the summer. But Jasmine is such a badass, and the films she makes are so cool, and I had watched all of her other shorts, so we just totally connected and bonded, and that relationship with your director as a creative key is really important, so we just vibed hard, and so the experience was amazing as a result.
Great, and we talked a little bit about the short film, which played here at the festival in 2013. It went on to be one of Canada's top 10 shorts and had great acclaim and success. That's a long lead time, 2013 to 2018. Could you talk a little bit about what that process looked like in making the decision to make it into a feature, and what the adaptation process looked like, and whether it was an influence for all three of you? I know all three of you have worked in both short and feature format filmmaking, so if you could just speak to that a little bit.
I think, like I said, we didn't have the intention of making it into a feature when we did the short, but about 2015, we were looking at applying for the micro-budget program, and we weren't really sure if we were going to get it or not, but we thought might as well try. So we started doing location scouting a little bit then. By 2016, we put in our application. Jasmine didn't have a script at that point. So once we found out we got the funding in 2016, it was pretty much go, go, go until now. I do think, though, taking the short into the feature, I mean, I think it's a good thing we didn't have the idea that the short was going to be a feature. Sometimes I find when people are like, oh, they have a feature idea and they're going to turn it into a short, the short ends up being a little bit like a trailer for the feature rather than its own like standalone film. So we didn't have that problem, but I think it was like the characters are the same and I think the themes are the same, but we really started fresh. And I think when Jasmine started writing the script, she tried to kind of put everything else, like everything about the short out of her mind and just start from scratch to make sure she's getting something authentic.
And how about you, Simone and Mara, did either of you feel that, you'd obviously both seen the short film, feel that you were influenced by it when you were keeping in mind the feature, your plans for the feature?
I mean, 2013 versus 2017, the dialogue around these types of stories, I feel like is very different. So when I read the script for the full length, I was totally floored. It totally felt like a new piece to me, like completely different. Even like the lead characters and Lou and Chantal, I think they just had like different identities that were more relevant to what the conversation is in 2017. And I think that was like the strength, speaking to what you said, Caitlin, just of not sort of being stuck and making a short that's a trailer for a feature, but making two pieces of art that are influenced by each other but do stand alone. And I think that you guys fully achieve that. This feels so different to me than the short film. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has seen the short film, but.
Yeah, and definitely on a technical standpoint, like the short was shot on, was it 35 or 16 mil? And it's all like lock-offs, minimal coverage, where this is handheld, crazy. So that really informed the editing and the style of the editing because, yeah, you're just kind of running with what the camera gives you, you know.
And Caitlin, did you want to add anything as to how your approach changed, not just by the nature of the constraints or parameters of the medium in terms of duration and what that looks like as a complete whole to stand alone as a short and then as a feature, but also, as was mentioned, the zeitgeist shift that has happened since that short was made? Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Jasmine, our priorities when we're making films is to make sure we're making intersectional feminist films, and that's very important to us. So I think this is definitely the film we wanted to make, and I think with the feature, you have a lot more time to explore certain themes that you couldn't really get in the short. For example, Lou's brother, Jesse, he is in the short very minimally at the beginning and end. There's not really this whole arc of him not fitting into the stereotypical image of masculinity, so that was something we got to add in with the feature. I think, again, just shooting was a totally different experience. We shot the short in 6 days, and it took us 18 days to shoot the feature. So if you think about it that way, it's a little insane. Like Simone said, there's definitely a lot of challenges in the way we shot this. I mean, I think it lent itself, the way we shot definitely lent itself to the style of the film and what we wanted to do, but it also worked much better for doing micro-budget filmmaking. When you don't have a lot of money, you don't really want to spend a lot of time on camera setups, so the camera was very fluid. When we're shooting outside, there's not a lighting that we have to worry about. There was a couple bigger days that, you know, we spent 8 hours shooting a scene that ends up being 1.5 minutes in the film. And then there's other times where you're shooting for like 4 hours and it ends up being 5 minutes. So it's just trying to balance everything out.
And you mentioned, of course, your own aims in terms of intersectional feminism and looking at the bios of everyone on this stage. Simone, you also were the editor on Never Steady, Never Still, and Mara, you also were the designer and stylist on Mouthpiece, Patricia Rosema's latest. If you didn't catch it at the festival, we'll have a theatrical release forthcoming, I'm sure. Could you, maybe all of you, talk a little bit about how you keep those sort of ideals and aims in mind when you're selecting what project to work on? And Caitlin, for you, when you as a producer are looking at assembling that key creative team and a crew, how and whether that's something that you take into consideration when you're making those hiring choices.
I think I've been doing costume for, let's say, about 3.5 years. And I don't think that at the beginning I necessarily had the luxury to, or even had the access, honestly, to only choose to make content that sort of reflected my own like ideologies. I think a couple years later, there's so many more voices at the top who have different stories to tell, so there's like a lot more access to like interesting, unique pieces of art that you can attach yourself to. But at this point in my life, what I make is like an extension of who I am. You know, maybe that's not everybody's thing, but when the film comes out, if it doesn't like reflect who I am as a person, you know, that because my art is connected so much to myself, they need to reflect each other. So it is really important to me, is what I'm getting at. If I read a script, it has to sort of, not necessarily check boxes, but it has to reflect the person that I am and the politics that I have and the social, you know, like society that we're living in. That was a little long-winded. Yes, it does matter to me. And I do focus on female stories and diverse stories and like with cultures that I don't know and cultures that I do know. So yeah. Just gonna zip that now, pass it on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, film is such a powerful medium that you have to be really careful of what you're putting out there into the world, and it's so easy to mishandle things. And you know, that's what I really loved about working with Jasmine. She was so careful about the film and portrayal of, you know, Chantel's experience as a person of color, how the film deals with assault. Like, there was just so much thought and care put into it that I think with a different filmmaker, you know, might have gone a different way. So definitely looking at the work and then also looking at the voice of who it's coming from, their understanding of maybe some more complicated things.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Jasmine and I, the benefit is we are creating our own content, so we can kind of create exactly what we want to make and not wait for somebody else to come along with the opportunity. I think, again, when we were like trying to attach crew, I think in our minds, of course, we're thinking like women, but at the same time, because the script is from such a female perspective, I think it wasn't even something that we were really trying to push. It's just women responded well to the script, and they were willing to come on and do it for nothing, because it was just seemed to be a story that they were connecting with. And not to say that there wasn't men on our set, because there was still a large number of men in our crew, but in the key roles, I think for like knowing that you're going to have to put in months of your time and not get paid for it, it really needs to be something you're passionate about. And for women, I think that connection was a little bit more, it was just stronger.
Cool. Mara sort of spoke to this already, but my next question was going to be about the ethics of a storyteller and authenticity, which is something that we've been talking about a lot at this conference over the past, over the day, course of the day. And basically just, you know, what do you feel is the role of an artist in ensuring that stories are true to the artist, but also to the subject and to the community, which you also touched on, Simone, Caitlin, or any of you. Did you have anything you wanted to add in respect to how you sort of steered this film into such an, what I feel is an authentic direction, which gives it so much power?
Yeah, I think it needs to come from an authentic place, and I think that's the first thing Jasmine would say is all of the characters either are a reflection of her, a reflection of people she knows. So she doesn't want to fabricate story elements or people, and I think that really comes across. I think for us, again, we are going to be trying to make films from that like female perspective. I'm not obviously a white woman. Jasmine is a person of color, so I think that plays in a bit more to her experience, especially with Chantel. But we have a lot of conversations about that and diversity and how to make sure you're making diverse films, but also not trying to tell somebody else's story. So I think that's a thin line. You got to just be very conscious and think about many aspects of that.
And certainly the film does a lot to address issues of gender and sexuality in a very intersectional and smart and subversive way. So I think you were very effective in that. Did you guys want to add anything on your end in terms of the editing or the costume design?
I mean, it was very important. We shared the film with a lot of people, also throughout the whole edit, making sure that things were reading the way we wanted them to. There was a couple scenes we cut out because people were getting the wrong idea about certain elements of the film. So yeah, definitely being aware, even with the best of intentions, some things might not be playing the way you think they are, and getting that kind of feedback and addressing it.
I guess speaking to authenticity and to what Caitlin said as well, but because this environment was so familiar to Jasmine, I feel like that's where we sort of approached the design and how people dressed. It was like very true to, I think, her own experience, and I feel like some of the wardrobe does reflect sometimes of like the earlier 2000s, the late 90s. It sort of feels like it's stuck in time maybe a little bit, which was the intention, just to create maybe something a bit more timeless in that way. But it's all a trickle down. Like Jasmine just like led her team fiercely and was so confident, and I feel like everybody just trusted her, and that's I think a rare thing to have on a film set. And yeah, she just like led the team, and that's a really important thing, and she handled all the stories so well, and I think she just gave everybody confidence to like use their art and collaborate with her.
Great. You know, listening to you speak a little bit about the design, it reminds me that I wanted to ask about the fact that the film has this remarkable interiority. I feel that there's this real inward journey that we're going on. And of course, it's also got this really vivid external world as well that it's set in. And it's so remarkable technically and aesthetically. And I don't want to spend time only speaking about its ideals and philosophical and political aims, because it's also just a masterful piece of work. And I wanted to ask you each if you could speak a little bit about how you went about marrying the inward and the outward when it comes to design in terms of characterization through costume, and also certainly the sort of psychological realism that comes to play in the film through editing, and of course the overall vision when it comes to production. So if you could each try to unpack that a little bit. I know it's a big question.
I got one. Yeah, we put a lot of care into the sound design of the film just to build up this world. I also grew up in a town like this, so Jasmine and I were like from the get-go on the same page. Like, we know what this world looks like, smells like, sounds like. At one point, a sound editor put an owl in there, and like, there's no owls in these towns. Like, it's not authentic. It's got to get out. So yeah, definitely. I mean, also on a film of this size, you generally do a ton of exterior stuff, but they've managed to pull it off, which you don't often see. But yeah, good job.
I mean, I think like speaking to like the cinematography specifically too, there's the idea that the camera is so handheld, and you're really supposed to be following the journey of especially Lou, and that's really supposed to be like in her face, so you can kind of feel emotionally where she is. And I think the camera work plays a lot into revealing that internal world of the film.
Definitely very immersive.
I know because for the like wardrobe and the costumes, we did have like quite a bit of time to make them. I think that was our gift. We didn't have any money, but we had time. And I know that I know like Michaela and Karina aren't here to sort of speak to this, but we like what we built sort of in those fittings, I think really for the two gals like directly affected the way they walked, the way they moved, the way they breathed. Like it, especially I think for Michaela who played Lou, she like never wore any socks inside of her high tops. And I know that was like a really psychological thing for her, and it made a lot of sense like for her character. And I think both of them had aspects of that, that we had time to finesse and incorporate that they could sort of take into their like internal and external character.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time rehearsing with the actors because we didn't have the time on set to do it, and all of our actors, I think this was like their first feature for everyone. We just really needed to build those relationships in advance, and we knew we didn't have time to do that on set. So there was a lot of rehearsals in the months leading up to shooting, and so when we got on set, it ran relatively smoothly.
Great. I'd love to ask you more about that. I do want to give the audience a heads up that I have a couple more questions of my own, but I will be opening it up to questions. So if you have one, please don't wait for me to call out. Put your hand up at any time just so we can get a mic to you, because we do have content capture this evening. I might actually just go from there to asking each of you if you could speak a little bit about who your influences are, both filmic and otherwise. Who drives you? Whose work inspires you? There's a lot of Andrea Arnold in this, I feel like.
I was going to say Andrea Arnold for sure. This is a hard one. I find that there's a lot of films. I like just coming to TIFF too and watching especially contemporary world cinema coming from the UK and Scandinavia. I find are most of the films that I connect with. But I would say Andrea Arnold and Lynn Ramsey are the big ones.
Oh, it's tough because there's the editors that I really admire and then the filmmakers I really admire. So as far as editors go, Kirk Baxter and Angus Wall, who do a lot of David Fincher's films, which just have this amazing kinetic energy that somehow they keep moving but never feel rushed. They're perfect with pacing. And Dee Dee Allen, who's old school legendary editor. She did Bonnie and Clyde and Breakfast Club. She did a ton of stuff while she's working. So.
Yeah, I find that also a hard question because it's sort of specific for each film, I guess. On a personal level, I feel like I pull a lot of inspiration from dance and sci-fi and just other film, those are sort of the mediums that I am sort of drawn to that sort of influence the things that make it on camera. But I'm trying to think. I don't even remember that we had this whole list of artists and people who were influenced by Firecrackers. I wish I reread
Petra
it before I
Collins
came.
was on there. I remember that.
Yeah. There was a lot of her. I feel like Princess Nokia just came out and she was super badass, and Tasha the Amazon, and there were a lot of those sort of references that we used for the film for the gals. Yeah.
I love that there's also that reference to the short with the shopping cart. Was that something that came about organically, or was that planned?
I think that was more organically. I think it was in our mind, if we could make a connection, then great, but it wasn't something we were trying to force. Yeah.
Did you just we just found one on the side? Is that what happened? There just happened to be a shopping cart, right?
No, I think we did. We got somebody to bring that to set, yeah.
Cool. I might ask if you could speak a little bit about what you feel is the current state of the industry and what opportunities and or barriers you think are out there as artists right now.
This year was the first time I ever lost a job to another woman, which actually made me really happy. Finally, I know that it's not just my gender getting in the way of things. So I'm feeling pretty positive right now. And I just see a lot of female-led projects being greenlit, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I think the Telefilm Talent to Watch program is great. It's not a lot of money, but I don't think we would have had the opportunity to make our first feature so quickly after leaving film school. So that's really encouraging, and I also feel like it opens up opportunities. Gender parity and diversity is fairly important to that program, and I think that they're making waves in that respect.
There's so much diversity that's happening, I think, in front of the camera, and I think it's really important for it to happen behind the camera as well, and that is something that we still need to strive to do better on. Yes, yeah.
Since we do, as I've mentioned, have a lot of students in the audience, do you have any advice on how to navigate barriers to inclusivity or authenticity in your work that you would want to bestow upon them?
I think the key thing is finding support and finding people who want to make films that you want to make, or at least connect to the same material. It can get very discouraging. The one thing I can say is I've always had Jasmine. We've been working together since we were in second year film school, so it's been 9 years at this point. So I'm very lucky to have her. I think that's a built-in support system. When things are kind of getting tough, there's always somebody to rant to.
Yeah, I've somehow ended up on mostly female-led projects. Maybe I'm drawn to them more, but also I've just not really approached that much by male-led projects. So of the 8 features I've done, 6 have been female-directed. So I guess organically you just kind of find each other. You come from common ground, and you generally bond over the same references and things like that. And yeah, you find a way.
I sort of forget what the question is.
Any advice on navigating barriers to authenticity specifically, or any industry barriers that you have encountered, or, you know, ways that you'd recommend navigating and finding your place in the industry?
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously all part of a way larger conversation that is, you know, again, from the top down, that we're just trying to work our way up in order for that trickle down to actually be effective. But I think, like, if you're all going to be working in film in some capacity, you will probably be asking your friends to work for free or work for nothing. And my recommendation to you to break barriers is to give people a chance and constantly be gracious for the art and the time that people give you. And I think that graciousness from a high position in film brings people up and gives people confidence, and you will have a crew that reflects your project, I think, if you do that. Great. Be nice when people work for free.
Or even better, pay people if you can.
Yeah.
I think we have a question in the audience. Can we go right over here?
Hi, you know it's not turned on, but I got a loud voice anyways.
Oh,
It is. Oh, wow. Okay. Hi.
Yeah, just hold a little closer. You got it.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. That was a very beautiful film. I found all the characters very gripping and very raw. I wanted to ask more about the visual style. I noticed that the sky in this film was incredibly powerful and very, very present, and we would always look up at it. It was almost like looking at Wonderland because the colors were so vivid. I wanted to know what was the conversation going in about the visual style and the approach, and we talked about editing, how everything's very close. So what was that conversation like? What was that, the challenges or anything like that going into that from that standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one. It was almost like a documentary edit, and just how many variables and parts that kind of, like, it was like you have a giant library of materials, and a lot of it was sort of found in the edit. So there's like the motif of the clouds kind of engulfing the sky. Like, that wasn't shot with the intention of being used in that way. You just sort of find some things, you try it out, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. That's probably why the edit also took 6 months, is just a lot of fun trial and error. And Catherine Lutz, the DP, just has an amazing eye. So, I mean, there's so much stuff that isn't even in the film that, you know, she was just grabbing things in between scenes as well. And we just had a whole plethora of things to choose from.
Yeah, without getting too technical, we had LUTs created for the film, so they were like looks that already like kind of adjusted the color a bit when she was shooting. That's a terrible explanation, but so we had that going in. I think it was important, like when they were outside, we wanted it to be bright, but almost like very bright and a little bit suffocating somehow, and keeping those spaces, like the interiors, kind of dark and claustrophobic. I mean, again, like I said, the camera work, I think, was a lot to reflect the emotional place of the characters. And like I said, it worked logistically well for our size of budget. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's important, though. Like, when you're working with a lower budget film, like, that kind of framing is, like, can make something, like, so successful, because you're not necessarily... You don't need to like build an entire world. Like, the world is just like right there in the frame for you. So I feel like it gives you so much more freedom. And I learned so much from watching this process as well, as somebody who is moving into writing and directing as well, just like working with sort of within your strengths. And I feel like you guys all did that. And that's why the edit is so powerful, I think, because of that.
And I'm really curious to ask, what do you guys think about form as a political tool and aesthetic beauty as a tool for impact? Because what I was really struck by in this film are how beautiful some of the really ugly and harrowing moments for these girls are. And what was the conversation around that, around the film's beauty as a tool to amplify its power?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I think Jasmine and I have conversations about things like, on the surface, what are these images kind of representing? Like, again, going outside and you're seeing all these trees, but being so glaringly bright, we wanted to kind of create a different vibe to that world where, yeah, things were pretty, but it's a little bit unsettling because internally, especially for the characters, or what's going on in the story is not pretty or beautiful. So there's that juxtaposition there. And again, I mean, I think a lot of the representation comes through, like, yeah, what's the gender? Like, again, Lou's not your typical female character. We didn't want to play up her femininity, like, where she's, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. But just keeping the idea, yeah, appearances don't necessarily represent what's going on, and kind of having that contrast there, I think, was important to put through, yeah.
Well said. Do we have another question out in the audience? One in the back. Please go ahead.
Hello. Hey, I really love the film. I was just curious, what actual locations did you guys shoot this? Because I felt you guys did an amazing job of making this town feel very real, and I thought you guys also did an amazing job of making us really feel like we were stuck in that town with the characters.
Thank you. We actually shot in London, St. Thomas, in Hamilton for the most part. So it's a lot of mismatching and bringing things, trying to make it look fluid in like one town, so I'm glad we were successful. So like the motel was shot in London, and the house was in Hamilton. It was a lot of traveling, a lot of location scouting, and that's one of the things, I think that was the biggest challenge with this film, or one of the bigger challenges, was because of the size of the budget, we didn't have money for location scouts, so it was mostly Jasmine and I and our other producer, Christy, going along to all these locations. And it took a lot of time to get everything and find the perfect locations, because again, we didn't have money to take a location and like get the production designer to turn it into what we wanted. We had to find basically locations that would work as is. So.
Great. How about right up here?
Hi, how are you doing? Congratulations on the movie. My name is Gordon Cully. I'm an independent filmmaker. From a development point of view, because you knew what budget you had, were there moments where you had to, the phrase was used earlier, manage expectations, where you kind of felt like, yeah, that's great, but it's gonna blow the budget?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things that we ended up having to kind of take out. Nothing too big. I think it was just some like shooting in a car, and we'd have to get a different rig, and that was going to be expensive. Again, I think because we went into it knowing it was a micro budget, Jasmine did a pretty good job for writing within our limitations, and it really focused, again, yeah, just prioritizing what's important. And I think there were certain things that she wouldn't back down on, and that was very important to get across, and other things that she was like, no, you know what, I can compromise on this. And I think it's important to go in knowing what you want to fight for and what you can kind of be a little bit more flexible with. But no matter what, I feel like doing any kind of film on this budget, I think, is a tough one. This one was harder, again, because of the number of locations and the actors. So I think if we had reduced like the locations or actors, which we couldn't really do and make the same film, it might have freed up some money to maybe do some more complicated shots in different kind of rigs, yeah.
Great, another question?
Hi
I see
there.
someone right here.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of really great discussion about this film as a teaching tool for feminist ideals and women's stories, and those are all really important discussions to have. But I was wondering if you could comment on this film's perspective on poverty and the cycle of poverty, because I felt like that was a really important theme in this film as well.
Again, I think because this came from a place where like Jasmine grew up around, like it's a reflection of either like her relationships and different friends and family that she grew up with. I think I can't talk to it as much as she could. It was important to make sure that we didn't look down on the characters and there was no judgment. And I think just treating them, with a lot of respect. I also think that, I mean, the poverty too kind of plays into the limitations. I don't want to say it's completely metaphorical, but again, financially, they can't really get out of their town. They don't have a lot of options, which plays into the themes, I think, of freedom and women not really necessarily being able to get out of their current situation and fighting against that. So I think that's where the poverty kind of lent itself to it. It's not something we necessarily really focused on, but we knew it kind of played an important part in the story.
I feel like to speak to that as well, what you said about not looking down on the characters, I think that's why the palette of the film is like so saturated and so rich. And I know that from the sort of like wardrobe of it all, Jasmine would always say like, yeah, that orange is psychotically bright, but I want them to look like superheroes. Like, who cares? Like, why the hell wouldn't they? So I think that, like, to speak to that and just to further what Caitlin said, it's there was just like no judgment on anyone. Like, they were all just like awesome in their own way and just real people also. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Right over here.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for making the film. I really loved it, and I thought it was incredibly powerful. My question is I've listened to a lot of female filmmakers do interviews, and they talk about the significant difference in atmosphere on set, just having more women on the set. And I just wanted to ask if you guys felt any difference on set, just having more female influence around you.
I mean, Mara might be able to talk about this a little bit more because I think she has more experience on set. I think, again, like, I've been lucky with Jasmine because, I mean, I haven't really been on that many other sets other than my own. And all of our sets usually skew a little bit more female. I do find that sometimes working with women's a little bit easier in terms of ego. But, I mean, yeah, I'll let Mara maybe talk.
I mean, it is a lot different. In my time working in feature shorts, TV, having somebody that I can talk to, a producer that's a female at the top, that takes what I do seriously, makes all the difference. That's not to say that I haven't worked with men or male producers or directors who have not been open, but I just find that there's a culture of film in general that's been the culture since the dawn of filmmaking that's more like militaristic. It's even in the lingo that we use on set. You know, it's everyone's moving quickly and just like get it done as quick as you can. And when you have a balance, when there's like a literal yin and a yang on set and there is like some feminine energy, it completely shifts it. And I think it really just speaks to balance. Like, films need to have balance. I find when there is more women, when there are more women in like positions of power on set, it's like quieter. I don't know. There's less. It just, yeah, the energy is just more balanced, I find, and I think that makes the experience more enjoyable. Like, Firecrackers was hard to make. You know, I was the only person in my department, and the department wasn't small. But I had so much support, and I would do it again with this group again. And yeah, I couldn't say that for everything I've worked on. So
I'm actually wondering, just as a follow-up question, if you had any feedback from the lead actors in that regard, because there are a lot of really vulnerable scenes in this film, and sex scenes in particular. I think it's a very different energy on set when you have at least gender parity. And was that something that you heard from the actors on, that the fact that there were so many females involved with this project? Did that create a safe space, do you think?
I think it's something they appreciated, especially with Catherine, our cinematographer, because when we were doing like the more sex or intimate scenes, those were on a closed set. So it was like Jasmine, Catherine, the sound guy, Brandon, and I don't even know if our AD was necessarily in the room all the time. So we were trying to keep those as close and intimate as possible. And I think for both Karina and Michaela, the leads, they had a great relationship with Catherine. She was there filming the rehearsals and everything. So there was already like this just comfort with her. I'm sure her being a woman helped with that. And I do think you can have a little bit more open conversation, certain things we were bringing up, like the line about the sand and everything. Like, there's certain things that I think women just relate to a little bit quicker in those contexts. Yeah.
Do you guys want to add anything?
I mean, I'm in the wardrobe department, so my relationship with the actors is very close and very intimate. So, I mean, I know that there was like a lot of support sort of between the three of us, and we had a really close relationship, and it's sort of important to establish that. But I know that they both did feel safe, and they're difficult scenes, you know, so they got them done. So they definitely had the support there to do it, because I think that these ones are, you know, touch on some more difficult things than I know I have seen in other films, Canadian cinema, yeah.
Great. I think we have another question right up here.
Thank you very much. I missed this at the film festival, sadly, but as a press member. But I just want to say to all three of you, congratulations on this beautiful film. And I know Mara said that this was difficult for this was a difficult film to make. So I want to know, what was the most difficult challenge that all three of you faced during any stage of production here?
I mean, keeping objective the 100th time you've watched the movie, that part gets tough, especially because it was such a long edit, just knowing, is this even landing anymore? And we went through so many different versions of some of the scenes where we'd have it one way we were happy with for like a month, and then one day Jasmine shows up and she's like, you know what, it could be better. And she was always right. I think some directors that are inexperienced sometimes think it could be better just because in their mind they had pictured it turning out differently on the day and they just don't have it. But like this was a case where she was right every time. We'd go through and like start over from square one, and then you're like, oh, this feels so much better. And like it wasn't bad before, but it was just better. So just like constantly striving for the best version of everything possible, but also not kind of losing, you know, where you're at. I don't know, it's a weird thing. Yeah, you're not supposed to watch movies that many times, I don't think.
Speaking to the challenges. I mean, I think budget was a huge thing, and also being in the department by myself, but that also weirdly was very freeing, and being able to be in charge of sort of everything and like the intimate nature of the set. Yeah, there were a lot of challenges, but like, again, I was so healthy mentally during that film. I can't say that for a lot of other films that I've costume designed for a variety of reasons, but like the traveling back and forth was a lot. Just, you know, this was something, Caitlin, but we always had the overnight right before the weekend started. So our weekends were a bit short. But besides that, that was my only complaint.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Mar. Yeah, the locations obviously were challenged, the casting. I think it's just everything takes longer because you don't have the money to make things happen very quickly. So you just have to be prepared to put in a lot of time and energy, which is, I mean, I think it paid off. Honestly, Jasmine and I have been working on this for 2-3 years. I don't know, I've lost count, for a while, and we haven't had much money or time to do much else. So it does take over your life. But I mean, at the same time, I wouldn't change it. I'm very happy with how it turned out.
Thanks for that. There's another question in the middle.
Hi, so thank you for the film. It's amazing. And it kept me on at the edge, like watching it and really feeling the characters and the flow of the story. And I have two-folded question. One is, how was it for you guys to work with most of the crew who this was first feature? And the second question, how was it for you preparing so much, having low budget, and looking at what vision you had at the beginning starting this and what you wanted it to become and what it actually became? I imagine that it's very organic after all, regardless of how you approach it, but how was it for you guys?
Well, just to start off, I think some of our crew, it was really our cast that was the first time for most of them making the feature. I think the good thing Jasmine and I did was make sure we didn't get crew who had, like, they had more experience than we did, so they knew what they were doing, and we were just kind of along for the ride sometimes. So I think that was helpful, or just getting people who are very passionate and care about what they're doing. I still think sometimes it's better to get somebody who's maybe not as great at their job, but much easier to get along with. I'd rather have somebody who's maybe like not at the top of their game, but somebody you can actually talk to and is not going to cause other issues with the crew, rather than have the one person who's like the best at their job, but a complete terrible person to talk to and get along with. Because that does matter a lot in the end. And sorry, what's the second part of the
vision?
Oh, the vision.
From beginning to end?
Yes. I mean, I think for Jasmine, she's one of the things I like working with her because she's very sure of what she wants and she doesn't hesitate. And that's not to say she's not able to change her mind. She's very collaborative and she wants to work with everybody and wants everybody to bring their ideas and thoughts to the table and make sure that it's a collaborative effort. But she's also very sure of what she wants and very sure of what the she wants the film to be. So there's not a lot of wishy-washiness with her. And I do think it ended up pretty similar to how we pictured it.
Yeah, definitely having these actors, it worked really well in some cases and was challenging in other ways. I mean, some of these actors aren't that far off from who they are in real life, which is always great because, like, Callum, the brother, he's fantastic and totally natural, and it never felt like a performance watching his stuff. But also because, you know, some of these actors hadn't really worked before. You know, every take's different, and then coupled with the camera, which is doing different things every time. You know, it's sometimes, you know, I like the way they say this word, but then the camera pans, and we need to stay on. So it's like a lot of just like this really intricate puzzle of getting all of the right pieces in a way that would work together, and then also not making it feel manufactured, which is just like a whole other level on top of that. So,
anything to add, Mara?
I mean, I think that like the way that the characters were, like the descriptions of them in the script maybe are like a little bit different, but then sort of how they turned out. But once Jasmine and I sort of talked about like the look and the energy, like especially with Lou, I feel like it's pretty true to how we always pictured it and always imagined it, and feels really honest to the script that I read like all those years ago.
Great. We have time for 2 more questions. I see one ready to go right here. Please go ahead.
So hi. So I wonder, like, what's the message does the film want to bring to the audience? Because I'm not quite sure I understand the film.
What's the takeaway?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different things we could talk about, but I think one of the principal things for us is this idea of freedom, and are women, or really anybody, going to be free under a patriarchal society, where you're constricted to what you can or should be doing by your gender. So you see every time Lou's fighting the patriarchy, she kind of gets punished for it. And, you know, then you can see the contrast with Chantel, who maybe is trying to work it in her favor. But I do think, like, again, with the men, most of these men have to present some, like, macho, very hyper-masculine sense of themselves. And you have the 2 characters, first Jesse, who obviously is dancing around wearing makeup, and his mom has a very negative reaction to that and tries to fit him back into this box of what it means to be a boy. And then I think you also see Johnny, who through his journey is kind of becoming more self-aware and kind of reflecting on his place in the world and how he kind of contributes to that. So I think it's really mostly about freedom in patriarchal societies and whether or not that's possible.
Simone and Mara, did you want to add anything in terms of takeaway?
I mean, I think that's honestly it. Just like the expectation of women, the type of woman you're supposed to be versus the type of woman that you are. I think you get to see like Lou and Chantal sort of like represent the same woman, like the same coin but different sides, and I think it's important just to see that and like the expectations of women and how they're affected by their like own environments, and but I think that takeaway that's it.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for everyone involved on a project too when there is that one core creative, or not so much creative, but thematic idea that everything sort of filters out from, that everyone's always on the same page. We're always going back to that idea, like this is about patriarchal oppression and all these different facets, but it's generally that one nugget is what you always go back to.
Yeah, I think men are affected by it as well in the film. I don't necessarily. I know that Jasmine and I have spoken about that, and I've heard her speak about it like that. How men are also sort of subjected to the patriarchy as women are too. Like their own expectations of what it means to be a man, can be like just as constricting. So I don't think it's exclusively for women. It's not like just a message for like women under the patriarchy. I think it's just the institution itself and how it affects all of us.
Freedom and equality really is what it kind of, I'm hearing from all 3 of you, comes down to, I feel like. We have time for one last question. Who would like to have the last word?
It's me.
Go ahead.
I have a quick and easy question. I want to acknowledge that I live in Hamilton, so I thought it was really funny when I recognized some of the scenes. I was like, oh, hey, I know that neighborhood. Anyway, I wanted to ask about the car right after the bar when it gets smashed. I was curious how that worked. Did you guys just buy a car to smash, or what was the story there?
We'll switch. We did buy a car. It wasn't running, and we got it towed to that lot. And then at 4:30 in the morning, we were losing a lot of light, and we were like, "Oh, we really need to smash this thing." Luckily, it worked in the first. Like, we had a stunt coordinator there who was kind of like directing Michaela like how to smack the car with a pole. And honestly, I think that was a little bit of luck that it just happened to work on the first take, because obviously you don't get a lot of opportunities with that. That was probably one of the more stressful days of the shoot, just because, yeah, we had to get this car. We only had one chance. We were losing a lot of light. The stunt coordinator went to a junkyard and tried smashing up a bunch of cars to see how that worked, but we didn't have Michaela do that. But yeah, we bought that car and then we sold it back to a wreckers, so.
Pure adrenaline for Michaela. That was like all adrenaline. Because I feel like other people after, maybe I shouldn't say this actually.
Yeah, no, Jasmine tried smashing the car and it did not work.
Yeah, exactly.
The post just bounced back and it was, yeah.
I feel like a couple people tried and nobody else could smash it, and Michaela just like totally went to town on it. So yeah, adrenaline.
Method acting at its finest.
Yeah.
Well, we do have to wrap up, but I might just finish up by asking each of you if you could talk a little bit about what's next for each of you or for your work with the film, and where everyone here could follow your careers moving forward.
What's next for me? I am in pre-production for my own film that I'm writing and directing, because don't put yourself in a box, guys.
Round of applause for that.
I'm getting applause, I'm gonna cry. So I'm doing that, and I have a feature that's coming up just in January in the nice Canadian winter that's sort of been like in the ether for about 3 years. So now it's finally happening. So that's just next year in January.
I'm just wrapping up on a rom-com right now called Spinster, starring Chelsea Peretti from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is pretty cool. And yeah, there you go. Yeah, so look out for that next year. And then, one reality of this industry is sometimes you don't know what your life is in a month, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. So, I have 3 things that may or may not happen, and I don't know, maybe I'll just take a vacation. Who knows? Yeah.
Also a good call.
Jasmine and I have just been traveling a bit with this film. There's still quite a bit for me to do with it, but hopefully that's going to wrap up soon. And then we're talking about developing another project and kind of seeing where that goes. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at Prowler Film.
Prowler Film, everyone get that? Well, it was so great hearing from all 3 of you, and thank you all for being here. Please join me in thanking our guests.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.